Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to me, your host, Christian Watson. So, my friends, it may not seem like it, but I am a part of Gen Z. And as a member of Gen Z, being 22 years old, I have seen a rather concerted and strategic attempt from the left to go ahead and attempt to push my generation into a direction that I believe will be ultimately harmful not only to the general progress of society, which is one consideration, but also to the individual progress of those people in my generation whom they are talking to, which is also another matter that is interrelated with the former matter. Now, I can already anticipate the responses. Well, Christian, the right does it too. Listen, there are plenty of things that both sides do in this country and in other countries as well. There are plenty of things I don't agree with. But just because someone else does the same thing as someone else does not sort of exonerate the person who's doing that something from responsibility. Everyone has to take responsibility, and I am choosing right now to focus on what the left is doing to my generation, as opposed to focus on what the right is doing. Although I do think, I'll be honest with you, that the degrees of difference between what the two projects are enough to put more focus on to what the left is doing. Now, another thing that's going to come up, when I see the left, what do I mean? What I mean is, in the United States, I mean the establishment of left-of-center politics, and even not even left center, but far leftist politics that has managed to grip control of the Democratic Party at various levels and propagandize my generation with certain ideas that are most certainly false and that are pushing them down a poor understanding of ethics, of concepts, of relationships, of values, of duty, all of these things. That is the danger here. Now, before I proceed onto the particulars of my critique, we should understand that it's not particularly new for leftist ideologies to attempt to reach the youth to succeed in their political ambitions. Just look what is happening over in Chile. Indeed, in Chile, in 2019, a bunch of student protesters basically galvanized a new political movement in the country to shed Pinochet's constitution, the constitution that was put in Chile when the dictator Pinochet rose to power and essentially liberalized a lot of the nation, privatized a lot of core industries like water and healthcare, and had this idea of subsidiarity, that if the private industry can do something better, the government should have nothing to do with it. And this is an idea that has come under attack by young Chilean leftists, which unfortunately happen to be in the majority of young Chileans that are politically active at this moment. And not only do young Chileans essentially provoke a change of the Chile constitution, and right now, and as of the date of this video, the new Chile constitution is heading towards a referendum in September, and if the country votes on it, and 80% of the country wanted a new constitution, then it will be the official law of the land. Now, the new Chilean constitution guarantees several radical things. It wants gender parity in all of the businesses and institutions in Chile. That means that in every institution in Chile, you have to have 50% of women and 50% of men, as if there is some sort of epistemic value to one's identity. Also, the government in Chile, if the constitution is passed, wants to overtake services like healthcare, like access to water, like education, and wants to pose all of those services as rights. Indeed. And the implication of that is that your rights come from the government, not from nature, and not from God. This is the ethos of most leftist movements around the world. Now, of course, there are different varieties of extremes. If we were to go to old Soviet Russia, when the Bolsheviks took over and Vladimir Lenin was arranging his project, there were 3 stages of youth development. There were the Komsomolets, which was the final stage. There was the young Octobrists, and then there were the little pioneers, the young pioneers, however you say them. And youth indoctrination in Soviet Russia in that era started at about as young as 7 years old. Then at 14, they would graduate and go to the final stage between 7 and 14. And youth could stay in these various different stages of communist organization until they were 28. And these youth groups didn't have very much to do with governance, as opposed to what's happening in Chile, where they have more of a direct impact on governance, but rather they helped control the cultural and value narrative of the Soviet Union. There are plenty of other examples where young folks have been used by leftist ideologies around the world to bring in a new reality, to bring in a new political system based on flawed ideas, which presuppose ideas that are not allowed to be attacked under these regimes, or if they are attacked, they are presumed to be attacking people as opposed to attacking concepts. And this is this conflation that happens all the time. And this is this conflation that particularly happens with woke gender ideology, where if you are critical of a concept, you are committing what they would call, the people who promote this ideology, what they would call erasure. You're erasing the existences of X person here because you are critical of the ideology that that person is promulgating. Well, I promise you, I don't think I have the power as another finite man to another finite man to erase someone else's existence except by actually physically killing them. Anything else is on the hands and in the perception of the person I'm talking to. I believe that a society that is a good society is a society built on respect and mutual trust, which is why I tend to respect people regardless of what they identify as. But what I will not do is be told that I have to conform to X set of ideas regardless of what those ideas are, lest I be violating the sanctity of my fellow man's being. Now, let's translate this over to American politics, which is where I'm really based at right now. Because I can mention Occupy Wall Street, I can mention several other movements where young folks were really the drivers. But in American politics, it's quite egregious. Right now, the Democrats are trying to sell young Americans a very bad bill of goods as it relates to student loans. Indeed, some of the top leaders in the Democratic establishment are trying to convince young people that their student loans need to be forgiven because it will help marginalized classes or to help reduce the pay gap. These are from some of the top senior leaders in the Senate and in Congress touting these ideas. And before I read their sentiments to you, I will say this. As a young person who does have a significant amount of student loan debt, God help me, I don't believe that it is the obligation of any one of you in society to pick up the tab where I have decided to do so. I decided to go ahead and enter into a contractual agreement with the loan provider so I could pursue my education. In hindsight, I wouldn't have done it, but that's a separate case. College in America right now college everywhere right now is just an overrun, dead-end pit of false ideas that are polluting the minds of the young. That's a different topic for a different day. But I did it. And since I did it, there's a matter of obligation. And the problem is, a lot of leftist ideologies don't believe in true obligation. They believe in obligation to the community or to certain classes or to people who have certain statuses. But they don't believe in obligation cultivated and entered in through voluntary assent and consent between two individuals. And that is what is at the crux of the student loan debate. Does the person who took out the loan, does the debtor have an obligation to fulfill their responsibilities in connection to the thing they took out? Of course they do, if you follow good ethics. But of course they don't if some unrelated characteristic from their identity or from their past enters into the equation. Well, I'm marginalized, well, I'm poor. All of these things were probably true, if you believe them to be true, when you took out the loan. The obligation is still there. It's laid at your feet. But of course, Elizabeth Warren, who is one of the biggest proponents of this, held a press conference a year ago, and they've been pushing for this as well, in which she said that it is of utmost importance to completely and utterly forgive student loan debt. She said the following thing. She said the COVID-19 crisis is worsening the massive inequalities in our economy and society, but even before the pandemic, the debt was already crushing millions of Americans. By canceling up to $50,000 in student loan debt, Biden can take the single most effective executive action available to provide a massive stimulus to our economy to help narrow and lift this impossible burden off of millions of families. Then you have Chuck Schumer saying student loan debt is weighing down millions of families during a pandemic, overlapping crises, which are disproportionately impacting communities of color. We must do everything in our power to deliver for the American people. And you go on and on and on with this utilitarian line of reasoning that says, because X amount of things are unfavorable over here, Y action has to be taken, as opposed to actually examining the relationship between the person and the obligation, the person and the object, the subject and the object, without actually examining these concrete things. But guess what? To examine these concrete things, the nature between my relationship with a certain idea or a certain task and obligation, you have to believe in the individual. And the individual is the most assailed unit, the most assailed being in modern society. My generation is being told constantly and constantly that they should be proud of their identity. They should be proud of being black, or be, in some quarters by different people, proud of being white, or proud of being Latinx or whatever. But very few people are told they should be proud in being just who they were put on this earth by whatever circumstance to be. The unique, dynamic individual burning with the fire who has the ability to apply themselves to certain things in a unique way that only they can do. That is the message that America, this country, was built upon. A bunch of unique and variegated men coming together and conjuring up from observation, from reason, certain truths that exist in nature, and then applying those truths to political structure so that we can all live in a more just, more better society. And this experiment relies on the recognition of the individual. But when that unit is destroyed, when that factor is destroyed, what happens? The entire structure, the system comes crumbling down. Things get undermined and you get replaced with foreign concepts like class, foreign concepts like gender ideology, foreign concepts like identity, foreign concepts like marginalized class status, foreign concepts that undermine the contractual sense in which we all exist in this world. There's another instance of this happening. Stacey Abrams, who essentially mobilized young voters to push Joe Biden over the 10,000 vote mark in Georgia, and to also get Senator Ossoff and Senator Raphael Warnock, the two Democrats from Georgia, who helped make up the Democratic majority, some majority in the Senate right now, helped get them elected. Abrams' group essentially took 300,000 voters that were registered and eventually made them 800,000 voters. And all those new registered voters that she mobilized were mostly young and mostly voters of color, as Politico said in an article. Youth are being used to drive leftist politicians into high places, to put them on high perches. And not only that, but Abrams recently did a sort of speaking tour as well about voting rights, trying to warn young people and attempt to mobilize them to action that their voting rights are being threatened by various laws being passed by certain legislatures. But the question is never asked, where do rights come from? If rights come from the government, which is an idea that our founders rejected from the inception of this union, then of course we could say that voter rights or whatever are paramount. But if rights come from outside of the government, and the government derives their just power, not just from the consent of the government, but the laws of nature as well, you could not say that voting is a right. Voting is not a right. It is a privilege of being in a republic. And not everyone should have that privilege. I think it is good for the republic if a lot of people do have that privilege. I don't want to see a society where just a few powerful folks can completely decide what happens in government, but incidentally, under democracy, that's what would happen. Under any kind of system, that eventually happens. A republic is the best buffer against it if the government is not in conspiracy with those powerful folks. And unfortunately, in many cases, it is. But back to the point. The question is never asked, what are rights? It is taken for granted what are rights. That's why you have so many people of my generation out there when Dobbs overturned Roe v. Wade, saying that abortion rights are being overturned. That's why you have so many young people out there with David Hogg marching and saying ban assault weapons. Remember at that time after Uvalde, where kids across high schools in America walked out and said we have to get new laws so we can stop mass shootings, despite the fact that mass shootings with those kind of weapons, assault weapons, are just a 0.24% of all those events. And not only that, but the term assault weapon is wrongly conceived. But not only that, gun violence, like any other kind of violence, is ultimately a matter of values, not a matter of force or coercion. And therefore, it cannot be changed by law. None of this stuff is being presented to people, young people, by the leftist establishment. It's simply buzzwords and boilerplate talking points that is galvanizing millions, hundreds of thousands and millions of young people around this country to political awareness. And when the basis of your political awareness is based on talking points and not based on deep knowledge or understanding of a particular issue, you cannot interface with reality. And if you are constantly going against reality, someone's going to win, and it's not going to be you. My generation, guys, we got to be more careful. We have to be more vigilant. We have to be more prudent. And we have to be willing to question whoever comes to you on the right or the left and ask the question, does the foundational principles of this republic that we live in, this great land of liberty, do those principles cohere with X policy? If not, reject that policy. If it does, consider it deeper. Don't accept it immediately. We need to have this healthy skepticism so that we can ensure that no one, and I mean no one, uses our youth as an attempt or an excuse to make a fool out of us. Because my friends, we are the generation with the most amount of information at our fingertips. We have more computing power on our phones than Neil Armstrong had on the moon. We have the power we had more information than the founding fathers did, and they crafted an entire political structure. Just imagine how much work and dedication that took. We have the power to continue this brilliant experiment, but we also have the power to bury our heads in our phones and ignore these cherished fruits, these cherished treasures that have been given to us down by the generations. What is your choice? Will you ignore those fruits, or will you take them and use them for a higher purpose? I know what I will do. What shall you do? Think on it, my friends. Love you guys so much. If you love me, please be sure to subscribe to this channel. Please be sure to go to my Patreon, patreon.com/Watson. Please be sure to comment down below. Be sure to like this video. Please be sure to share this video on all platforms. Please be sure to come and join my Discord, which is also in the comments down below. My friends, I love you guys so much, and please, forever and eternally, stay pensive. Bye, guys.